For centuries, man's been fascinated by ways to alter his states and thus his experience of life. He's tried fasting, drugs, ritual, music, sex, food, hypnosis, chanting. All these things will have their uses, and they all have their limitations. However, what I want you to do now is just learn how to take direct control. I've said before, your brain is like a biocomputer. All you have to do is punch in the signals of what results you want, and you'll get them. Why not just do it directly? It's all controlling and directing states. Really, I would say the quality of your life is not only the quality of your communication, but it's really based upon your ability to manage states. Maybe your goal should be an effective state manager, because by managing your states, you manage your emotions and thus your behaviors in life. That's why, for example, when we have toddlers, we make sure that they stay rested up because we know as they get more tired, as their physiology changes, their positive responsiveness to the environment also changes. That's why we make sure they get a nap so they're not cranky. Human beings, as they grow older, some of them still need naps. Some of them still need ways to have more energy so they're not so cranky in their response. But remember, how we represent things, how we use our body, those are the keys. Those are the master tools to directing your brain, your emotion, your behavior, and your life. For example, how do you respond when a loved one arrives home hours late from when you expected them? Well, it depends on how you were representing why they're late. If during the 2 hours that you were waiting for them, you imagine that the reason they were late is they may have been in a car accident, and you imagine them bloody or possibly in a hospital, then when they arrive home, you might greet them with a state of concern. You might give them a big hug and say, "God, how are you?" If instead, while they were late for those 2 hours, you continued to represent to yourself the possibility mentally that the reason they were late is they didn't care about you or because they were with someone else in a clandestine affair, then I guarantee you'll be in a different state when they arrive home, and you will probably treat them in a way that will cause them to want to have clandestine affairs because you wouldn't be very pleasant to be around. Also, the other thing that would determine your response is if you were physically run down, you might respond quite differently than if you felt energized and vital and strong and happy. If because of your dietary patterns your blood sugar is low, you're going to respond quite differently than if you have a dietary pattern that allows you to be biochemically healthy. Now, the next obvious question that came up for me was, okay, it's true, it seems, that human beings' behavior is the result of the state they're in. I mean, if I'm physically run down, I'm going to respond quite differently than if I'm physically vibrant and strong. But my question is, how come when people are in the same states, they behave differently? I mean, one person, when they feel loved by you or they love you, will express it by hugging you. Another person may just tell you and not hug you. Why do they behave differently? Well, the difference is they're models of the world. Some people, for example, when they're angry, have one model in their brain of how to respond. Out of a state of anger, their model of responsiveness is to lash out, and that's their only choice. Other people have more elegant choices of how to communicate, how to change how they feel, how to change the way other people behave through their communication skills, and so they behave differently. I remember seeing some pictures of war in the Middle East and over in Cambodia, where I watched at one point on film a 13-year-old boy who went into a state of rage and anger and then picked up a machine gun and blew a bunch of people away. I mean, it was an unbelievably devastating scene. How could a young man do that at the age of 13 years old? Well, one reason is he was in a state of rage. But when you and I are in rage, we don't pick up an Uzi submachine gun and blow someone away. What's the difference? Well, in his environment, in the war-ravaged area of Cambodia, it seems like an appropriate response. He's seen other people do it, so when he's in that state, he behaves that way. This is why it's critical that, one, we manage our states, and that, two, we develop as many choices as possible on how to respond out of states, so that we learn that even if we are angry, what's the most elegant way in which to express that anger where it does not harm ourselves or others, but rather takes us closer to our goals. And this can be done by modeling successful people. So understanding how to direct your states is like understanding how to get the best out of yourself at any moment in time. When we learn how to master our states by directing our internal representations, that is what we picture and say to ourselves, and when we manage our body effectively, we literally learn to master our lives, our emotions, and our behaviors. And we can take things that may seem very difficult and make them very simple. For example, I was recently on an airplane with Ken Blanchard, the author of The 1 Minute Manager. And Ken was writing an article at the time for Golf Digest in which they asked him to go out and work with the best golf instructor in the United States and see if he could distill some of the key elements and make them simple and share them in an article. Well, Ken worked for the man for several days and took a few strokes off his golf game, and he was very excited about that. And he said that there was one challenge, though. And the challenge was, he said, there's so much to remember that when I go up to hit the ball, it's hard to remember it all. And I told him very simply, you don't have to remember it. I said, have you ever hit a golf ball perfectly? He said, well, of course. I said, have you hit a golf ball perfectly more than once? He said, sure. I said, then how to hit a golf ball is already trained. It's already programmed into your nervous system. All you got to do is go back into the same state you were in when you hit a golf ball perfectly, and everything will happen automatically. He said, well, that sounds real good, but I just can't imagine it being that easy. I said, well, it is. Let me show you how. And what I had him do was go back to the times when he hit golf balls perfectly and reassociate to those experiences and get back in the same exact state, and then create a triggering device so he could put himself in that state at any moment in time. Well, he got very excited by this. The next day he went out to play golf and he knocked 15 strokes off his golf game. If you don't know that much about golf, that's pretty much unheard of. He shot better than he had in almost 15 years of playing golf, all because he learned how to get in the most effective state. About 2 years ago, Life magazine was doing an article on me and my work, and I made several claims about the work that I'd done and the kind of results I produced with athletes. So one of the writers, who seemed to be a little bit harsh at the time and a bit of a doubting Thomas, which she had a right to be, said, well, let's see you produce the result with somebody right now. I said, well, get me an athlete. So we happened to be at my home at the time, and the Laker game was on, the Los Angeles Lakers. And there was a man named Byron Scott on there. And he'd shot 1 of 9 shots that day and scored 3 points. And Chick Hearn, the announcer, was talking about how terrible he'd played. Well, I said, get me him. He'd be a great example. And they did. I went up to Los Angeles the next afternoon, and I worked with Byron Scott, just showing him how to change his state briefly. Nothing very intense, nothing very long. But before I showed him, we let him just shoot free. And he shot around the courts, taking various shots, and he was shooting about 1 out of every 3 shots, effectively. And then I began to work with him. And the way I worked with him is I had him access the parts of his body and his brain, how he represented a shot when he made one. What was he thinking in his brain? What was he picturing unconsciously? What was he saying to himself? What were the quality of his movements like? How was he breathing? I did this with him for about 15 or 20 minutes, at the end of which we showed him how to create this same triggering device so that he could put himself in state consistently. Well, I gave him the basketball, and he made 28 shots in a row from every place on the court. He didn't miss after the 28th shot. His partner began to think, well, this isn't possible. He says, man, I'm telling you, I can't miss. And he went out the very next day, and he shot 8 of 12 shots and scored 22 points and was the second highest scorer in the game. He practiced with us on 3-point shots. And by the way, by the end of the season, he was one of the top 3-point shooters in the entire NBA. Now, I'm not suggesting that I programmed that in and made him the best 3-point shooter, but what I did do is assist him in getting into the state that would allow him to make use of the resources he spent a lifetime developing. I did the same thing with a man named Michael O'Brien, a swimmer. Michael was in the 1984 Olympics in the 1500 freestyle, and he was hoping to win a bronze, maybe a silver medal. But during his practice sessions, he was continuing to sabotage his success. He wasn't going for it full on. He had a certain level of fear. I showed him how to reprogram out the fear and how to access his ideal states on cue. He went out and beat the United States champion by over 6.5 seconds and won the gold. Once again, I couldn't have programmed that in. He spent a lifetime developing the resources, but I showed him how to get access to them. And just as you have developed resources through your lifetime that you may not be accessing now, you can by changing your state, by remembering times when you've been effective, embodying that physiology or posture, breathing pattern, facial expression, and seeing things and saying things to yourself the way you did then, you'll begin to feel similarly and produce the kinds of results that you deserve to produce now in your life. Great leaders and great motivators understand the power of state and how to change it in other people. The ability to change other people's states is a quality that can also change the quality of your life. I mean, haven't you ever walked into a restaurant and had the waiter or waitress walk up to you and say, "What do you want?" and be upset with you, and you haven't even done anything? Well, what's your response? Do you usually say, "Oh, this person's doing the best they can with the resources they have. They're in a poor state, so they're treating me poorly"? It's highly unlikely. Usually we get upset as well. But in our getting upset, it doesn't change anything. We don't get better service. That person's still upset. What if instead you were to say, hey, this person is responding out of a poor state. They're not an unresourceful person. They're just in an unresourceful state. And I can change their state and change their behavior. How can one do this? Well, it's simple. Change the way that they're representing who you are. If they walk up and go, "What do you want?" you can go, "Nothing right now. I mean, I can see they're overworking you. Why don't you take your time and help everyone else, and when you have a chance, come on back and take my order." What's that going to do? The person's going to probably look back and go, oh, I'm sorry, and they're going to reevaluate the state they're in. They're going to say, I'm sorry, I'm just stressed out because I didn't get any sleep last night, or I just argued with a cook, or I've been arguing with my boyfriend and I've been thinking about that, or the last people didn't leave me a tip, or whatever, something that's affecting their state. And they'll go, no, I want to take your order. And you go, no, please help everyone else first, then come back to me. They go, no, I want to help you. Okay. You can change people's states and have fun doing it. You could change a person's physiology. What if somebody came to you and they were real upset with you and you gave them a hug? Do you ever see your puppy dog? Doesn't your puppy know how to change your state? You start to yell at the puppy and it comes down and it puts its nose at your toes. That changes your physiology.